Welcome to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared create collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. Today I'm talking to director, filmmaker, musician, writer, and all-around good guy Ron Chapman today to talk about his film, The Poet of Havana, which is about the internationally renowned musical artist out of Cuba, a musician by the name of Carlos Varela. You are going to enjoy this interview. You're going to love the film. You've got to check it out. It really is quite a remarkable journey and an amazing sort of musical journey, but it also gets into the history of Cuba, and we see 30 years of not only musical history played out, but we see 30 years of Cuban history played out as well, as Ron tells this very intricate story, really, and yet in such a beautiful way. Great concert film, great musical film. You're going to, I think, enjoy it for so many different reasons. And so I really do hope you stay tuned. And Ron and I talk about the universal truth of the melody. How's that? Hope that resonated enough with you to stay tuned. DavidPeckLive.com for more information about other podcasts. And you know what? Just don't touch that dial. Well, welcome to Face. We're joined by a very special guest today, a documentarian, a filmmaker. Ron Chapman is here today to talk about his latest film, his latest piece called The Poet of Havana. Ron, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate you joining us as a guest.
Great to be here.
So Ron, you're clearly a filmmaker, but I understand you're a bit of a musician as well. Tell me more about that. Quick overview. Do you play like the trombone, or what's your instrument? What's your preferred instrument, Ron?
It's very funny you mentioned that because actually when I started in school, I played baritone, horn, and trombone a bit. So it was my first instrument. You just hit somehow.
Ron, and let me guess, you got all the girls with the trombone and the was it the French horn?
No, the baritone horn. Which you didn't get any girls with that.
Right.
That was the small tuba. It was a stupid looking thing, euphonium. It was called. But musician, I've been a musician. I play keyboards, I play guitar, I write songs, I played in bands. I had a history in the music business as a manager, as a musician, as a concert promoter, as a club owner. Record company. I did a lot of stuff in the music business for a long time.
Wow. Okay. So you've been deeply. This isn't just about dipping your foot in the industry, the pool of the industry. You've been fully immersed.
Absolutely. And my previous film, The Ashes Arthur Fogel, was all about the music business. It was a documentary that really talked about all the changes that have happened in the music business over the last 15 years and showed a peek behind the curtain at how the business, big business of music works.
So what draws you? I mean, we've got a finite amount of time here. We've got so many things I think to talk about. I'm looking at a whole lot of notes. First of all, congratulations on the film. It's a beautiful film. It's a beautiful piece. It's a real. It's an art piece. It's a great documentary. But it's also I don't think I was expecting such a concert film. Actually, I was really kind of blown away by that, and I love the way you articulate it and sort of between interviews and rehearsal and stage. I mean, it's a really nice, almost triptych in a way. It's
beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, no, Carlos, you can't know Carlos without knowing his music, and I knew from the beginning that I had, it was a challenge. I mean, he's got such a great history, such a large body of work, and all of it's so important. But I needed to be able to, live within the music and translate it properly to give people who didn't speak Spanish an understanding of the depth, the breadth of his lyric, and so I'm so glad that came through.
So it's really interesting that you say it that way. You needed to live within the music and translate it properly. One of the things I took away from this is you almost, like I was drawn in right away. I mean, first of all, right with the images on the beach and almost, like Carlos coming out of the ocean, which is really lovely on so many levels. But I don't speak Spanish, Ron.
Yeah.
And I almost felt like I didn't need to. And so there was, and I think even Benicio del Toro talks about, things being lost in translation and the political impact of that as well, and especially with respect to Cuba. But in a sense, yes, you translated the music for me, but I kind of didn't need that if I had been a part of that concert. Does that make sense?
Well, you don't know how much sense that makes. I'll tell you, when I started in Cuba, I was working on another film. It's a music film also, where I shot over 60 artists for that film. But when I started in Cuba, I didn't speak Spanish. I knew, 5 or 6 words. When I fell in love with Carlos's music, I probably understood about 15% of what he was saying. That's how bad my Spanish was at the time, and it didn't matter. So you and I are simpatico here. I had the exact same. It was like when I heard his music, it spoke to me. It was like I understood what he was saying without understanding what he was saying. It moved me, hugely. I mean, emotionally. I was so touched by so many songs, and yet I was going, I don't really know what he's saying, but I think I know. I think I know what he's saying, and and that's the magic of music. That's the magic of getting those. When those components, when they all come together, when they work, when melody, instrumentation, voice, and passion all come together properly, that's the magic that music has. It is another language unto itself. And after that, of course, I was inspired to know what he was in fact saying. And once I started doing that and got to the translations of what he was saying, I understood why he had been called one of the top 10 greatest writers of our time by his peers, because he really is that, and that's why the film ended up being titled The Poet of Havana, because he really is that.
And Ron, do you think some of that sort of camaraderie, or I don't know, can I say this, musical commiseration, if you will, the way you sort of you feel drawn right in, I would imagine the effect at the concert would be the same, or if you pulled out the guitar like you've got him playing on a dock at a lake, or I would imagine there would be a similar effect. Do you think it's because we know the history to some degree? We do understand that separation, some of what's gone on in Cuba and so on, so we relate on that level? Or is it kind of more of a melodic thing that he talks about his music being very spiritual at a couple of points. Somebody in the film, at one point, I love this quote, I felt an energy, a force that engulfed me, right? Like, that's just so beautiful. And I think most of us who have been blown away by a concert have felt that same kind of force.
Well, there's no question, and he is, he's an incredibly spiritual being. He's driven by his spirituality. He's a great artist. He's an artist, and I think one of the things that's unique about Cuba and unique about Cuban artists is the reason they're artists. They're not artists because they're thinking they're going to, make billions of dollars and have big fancy cars and houses. That's not an option for them. Most of them never get off the island, find a way off the island. There's no big monetary payout. So they are artists. There are people who are drawn to art because they're artists and they're drawn to art, and their only intent is to make great art, not to try and pander to, what the current taste is, or what the charts are playing, or what will tour better. They do what they do because of a passion and a commitment to art, and that, I think, is what you're hearing and what you're seeing in his music.
I so love the way you capture the passion and the affection that every one of the guests, every one of the musical guests, every one of his friends shows, the audience even, the warmth of that night. You've just really captured it so well. There's just such a friendly atmosphere, and I would imagine that's a testament to Carlos's own generosity. I would imagine.
everybody falls in love with Carlos. You know, it's like when you talked about that thing on the beach with the guitar. I mean, that was my first interview with Carlos ever. And that was my travel guitar. I traveled with a travel guitar, and I brought it to the interview, thinking maybe I'd give it to him. He might play something. We might have a moment with it, and you know, good instincts, I think, in retrospect.
Nice.
But,
I'm a little, Ron. I have to say, Ron, I'm a little disappointed you don't travel with a trombone, but.
I haven't gone back to that instrument for a long time.
I think it's best for all of us, Ron. I think that's the reality.
I think that's one of the reasons I haven't, actually. I'm doing you all a favor.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But, you know, you meet Carlos, and it's like, you know, I felt I had met someone I'd known all my life. And I think that's part of his magic, you know. And everybody who meets him and gets within that aura really feels like there's a special relationship. That's part of his magic. That's part of what's really unique about him. He's a very special, unique person in that respect, and that, you know, that emanates from the stage and to the audience, and the audience feels like they're part of his world. You know, especially of course in Cuba, where, you know, what he's saying so represents what they're feeling, and he's articulating in a way that they can't. Yeah, he's you know, a very unusual and unique individual.
I loved, and I can't remember who it was who said it in the film, but somebody said Carlos speaks to the Cuban condition, and I just thought that was lovely on so many levels. You know, obviously Carlos speaks to the human condition, it seems to me, but in this case, because he does have a universal appeal, right? I mean, this isn't just about Cuba. He's clearly had the splash and ripple effect is gone far and wide.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great insight. You know, people in Cuba, Carlos, and you know, people say that you look at Carlos's body of work. I shot that on the anniversary of his 30th year as an artist. You know, you follow his music, you see the history of Cuba in those 30 years, in his songs, in his music. But what really knocked me out, and why I, you know, realized that I had to make a film on Carlos, and what I wanted to communicate in that film was not that, you know, he was just the voice of the Cuban people and the heart and soul, you know, the cortisone and the alma of the Cuban people, but that he spoke about he sang about universal issues. Any one of his songs, even though it may have been inspired by something that was uniquely Cuban, you could apply to someone who lived anywhere in the world. They have universal appeal, and that is why his peer groups have, you know, said he is this great artist. It's not just that, you know, he has this little Cuban niche. He's an artist who sings about the universal condition in his songs.
Well, the song, and I can't remember the name of it in Spanish, but the song about William Tell is astounding. It's astounding. It's astounding melodically, but it's astounding from a storytelling perspective. You know, it had. I mean, it just. I know he doesn't. I think I read somewhere he doesn't really like being compared to Bob Dylan, but I couldn't help but think about the narrative thread through most of Dylan's work, or Tom Petty's work, or people like that over the years. You know, William Tell. I mean, how can you not? Who hasn't taken on a higher power in one way or another? You know.
Yeah. No, his rendition of that story and how he applied it, you know, and whether you then take that and say it's about, you know, a people and a political entity, or whether it's about a son and a father, or whatever that relationship is, you know, I mean, the artistry of the way that he spun that story and the emotion that you feel during that time is you know, overwhelming, and you see it in the audience and their reaction. I mean, you know, his songs, you know, literally tear your heart out. He finds a way to touch a nerve, to make you feel things that, you know, in a way that only a great artist or a great poet or a great statesman could.
I think I mean, I've got so many favorite lines out of the film and moments, but one of my favorite lines is, "Piracy has always been a blessing in Cuba."
Yes. That's interesting, you know, because, I mean, piracy buried the industry here, and when not, you know, buried the industry, it buried the industry, and it buried the artists. It took away their livelihood in North America. It was an awful, awful thing in terms of the effect it had on the livelihood of artists, on the livelihood of the companies that tried to support artists. It did make the music more accessible to people. The question is, what music have we lost because of that? But in Cuba, piracy was always there, and that's how people got music, because either they couldn't afford it or it wasn't, it wasn't allowed, and it was the only way it got distributed. So it's actually, it's something they lived with all their lives as a blessing, as opposed to us who've lived with it here for a short time, and certainly to the artists and the industry, it's been a curse.
Well, it's really interesting. Earlier on in the film, he talks about that whole underground movement, which must have been huge in a communist country at the time. How his music was obviously pre-internet and so on, and but on cassette tapes being handed, literally handed to other people to say, hey, check this guy out. And so he talks about that. And then, he talked about how difficult it was to put a concert together and how we just, threw it together. And but he relates the one time where he said, where he was at an event and people were singing back to him, and he realized that his music was getting out there. And he said something to the effect of, I realized that writing songs now made sense. And I love this thing that he said. And this is connected to the notion of piracy, which I love. I love this irony, but he says, that was the day I met myself. And I go, okay, I'm getting a shiver right now as I quote that line, and I can hear some of the songs, and I go, this guy is everyman. Yes, he's clearly gone on to do wonderful things musically, Poet of Havana, and the lyrics, and telling stories, and all of that. But I think for me, Ron, what I resonated with was his authenticity. His deep sense of humanity. I'm just a guy. I write some good songs. I get that, but at the same time, I love my country. I want to live here, and I'm trying to make sense of it all, And there's still this sense that he's growing, and he hasn't quite, figured it all out. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, he's on a journey. He's a committed artist, and he's a chronicler of his times. I mean, clearly, when people said that you follow his music and you can see the history of Cuba, I think that will only continue. He's fascinated by his environment and his world and what's happening and how it affects people.
Doesn't he say near the end of the film something about he's still on the road to getting to know himself or something along those lines?
Yeah, he's still searching for who he is and what he can do and what he can share. I think like any artist, I mean, look, you finish an artistic piece and then it's a finished piece. You can go out and play it again and again. You can try and reinvent it, but it's still something that you did. You're always left with that. Well, what's next? I mean, I finished my last film. It's an amazing journey doing the film and coming, but at the end, it's being shown, and it's only being shown. I'm not doing anything anymore. I need to be working. What am I doing next? What am I applying myself to? What's my next challenge? You're driven as an artist to continue to produce, and that's why so many artists have been so depressed when they found they haven't been able to find that next project, that next thing that gives them the gratification that they're looking for.
Did you ever find as the director-producer that you were so involved with the minutiae, the BS of the filmmaking process, that you weren't able to, really enjoy the moment, that you missed? Did you ever reflect back and go, wow, I wish I'd been more present?
That's an interesting question. It's so much a part of my DNA, the multitasking and dealing with, so many of the issues at one time that I don't know whether I've ever stopped and said that. I think part of it is adjusting to the moment in a lot of senses in terms of getting things done. So reacting, coming up with a solution. Going for this and finding out that it's not available and saying, well, how do I come out of this with something and coming up with that solution. So for me, the moment is and because I've always been sort of the director producer on set, producing myself while I'm shooting, and what I need to do. It's just a part of who I am. So I do have those moments, but I do have them as the director producer split. I would like to just be a director sometimes, because there's no question it's a lot more difficult. It's a lot more difficult. Trying to do both at once while you're shooting. But, I've always had good teams around me. I've had, good people. I had, two producers on the film with me, Jack Lenz and Carlos Iglesias, who is Carlos's manager also. So
you were in good company.
Yeah, in good company.
What do you take away from it personally as a filmmaker, as a musician, as a writer yourself? I'm assuming you've written your own music over the years, all the way back to the brass instruments. Mm-hmm. What your sense of growth? How does the splash and ripple effect of I mean, maybe it's Cuba. Maybe the question really is about, why the heck were you in Cuba in the first place? And what is it about the country that touched you? What is it about that whole story that's resonated with you?
Well, I guess, going back to that, I was in Cuba initially to work with them to help them publicize tourism as a commercial director, as an agency, developing a campaign. And in doing that, I went across the country probably now about 3 times shooting Cuba. So I've gotten to know the country quite well and the people quite well, the different parts of the country and the different peoples that live in different parts of the country. I've got an association with them and an understanding and a lot of the people. And it demystified Cuba a lot for me because I really hadn't known Cuba before that.
Right.
So, part of what I wanted to do with these films is to try and help bring the real soul, the real people of Cuba to a world that really hasn't had a chance to experience it for a variety of reasons, as a result of the restrictions of the embargo, the restrictions of travel on Cubans, and the restrictions of travel on Americans to Cuba. And it did... really revitalized my relationship with my music. I started writing again more. As an artist, I became passionate about getting back into music. I ended up recording 2 albums, one of which I just released about a month ago.
Oh, wow.
And I wrote all of the stuff while I was working in Cuba. It was really very much inspired by that sort of pure, just go back to my roots and think about the art, nothing else. And I had sort of a vision of a sound that I wanted to get, which was incorporating Cuban strings, Cuban horns, and Cuban percussion with my singer-songwriting style into sort of a unique blended mix. And that's what I sort of endeavored to do. I recorded bed tracks here in Canada. I went and worked with one of the great Cuban trumpet players, the arrangers, who included Browne in Cuba. We recorded all the strings, horns, and percussion in Cuba. I came back and the album was mixed by Terry Browne, who is one of the great producers and engineers in Canada. Came from England, did all of Rush's early albums.
Wow!
Has worked with just so many great people, Jimi Hendrix, all kinds.
Okay, hang on. You got it. What's the name of the album? So it's just been released. Let's get a plug in there. What is it?
The name of the album is As Worlds Collide.
Nice.
As Worlds Collide, And so that's part of what my relationship with Cuba, inspired in me. It was a life changer in that respect. And in terms of, the film with Carlos, I think I mentioned that I was shooting another film when I found Carlos, which was really an overview of Cuban music. I was so overwhelmed by the diversity and different genres of Cuban music that I didn't know about. I started a film. Its working title at the time was This Ain't the Buena Vista Social Club, because I really wanted to show that there was so much more than just that one style of music, which was called son, which was really a pre-revolutionary style of music played by, the older generation. There was really everything from rumba to rap in Cuba, and I discovered Carlos during the filming of that, and with Carlos, I just think it's such a human story. It's his story is such a human story, and the story of the Cuban people is such a human story.
At what point,
from before the revolution, through the revolution, to after the revolution, what they've gone through is, and the country is just one of the most interesting and unique countries in the world at this time.
Yeah, I was actually. I'm fairly well traveled and had not been to Cuba, and was able to get there just this past year with my family, and had a marvelous time. Got into Havana and spent a little bit of time on the beach and so on. And obviously didn't dig too deep in a 10-day trip, but still it was a remarkable visit. Ron, we probably have to wrap up here in a couple of minutes here, sadly, but maybe we can do a part 2 very soon. But at what point did you know that you had to make this film? So you're in Cuba, you're there working on behalf of tourism, etc., and you meet Carlos. When do you go, all right, now I'm putting my producer hat on?
Well, as I said, I was doing my other film where I shot 60 Cuban artists and interviewed over 100 people and did a ton of B-roll footage across the country for my other film, which I just released about a month ago. It was released at the Miami International Film Festival, and just last week it was the Tampa International Film Festival, Gasparilla International Film Festival, and won the Grand Jury Award for Best Documentary Film.
Nice.
And that film's called The Forbidden Shore. And it was during that time that I met Carlos and decided I really needed and had to do a film with him. And interestingly enough, for Canadians, Carlos's manager, Carlos Iglesias, lives here in Toronto.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And Carlos was visiting Toronto, and I was taking them up north to an island on Georgian Bay because I wanted him to experience what the Canadian North was.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it was on the way up there in the car, we were talking, and he was talking about, they were both talking about doing a 30th anniversary concert, putting something together in Havana and maybe filming it for a DVD. We were talking about that, and I said, you know what, let's do that, but let me shoot a film also about Carlos, because I think there's a beautiful film here, and maybe we'll work the film to work around the concert, sort of as the center point, and then I'll build it out from there. And so it was in a car on Highway 69 on the way to an island in Georgian Bay that this film was actually born.
That's awesome. That's a great story. I so love. I mean, talk about incremental change, splash and ripple effect. Mm-hmm. You just never know, right? A conversation turning into a concert film. Honestly, it's a beautiful film, Ron. It really is. And again, congratulations. Thanks so much for your time today. I hope we can do a part 2 down the road. We're gonna certainly put a link or two about the film, and maybe we'll put a link about your new album, As Worlds Collide, as well, and up in your bio. What's just before I wrap up here? What's next for you?
Well, right now I'm just taking my new film, the Forbidden Shore, on a festival circuit. Actually, I've got a premiere in Washington, which is going to be really interesting, coming up in about 2 weeks.
Nice.
And that should be. I mean, on the heels of the Rolling Stones and Obama visiting Cuba, there couldn't be a better time
the timing
for that film and
perfect,
and for this film,
absolutely,
to hit the market. So. That's keeping me pretty engaged. I've got about 3 or 4 other projects that I'm just in development on that are getting close to completion. But right now, I'm just focusing on getting these 2 out into the world and making sure that the world sees them. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, you make a film or you make a record, whatever it is. First of all, you do it for your own personal gratification because it's a passion and because it's something you need to do. And after that, it's bonus if you can get it out there, and the rest of the world can see it and take something away from it. And that's actually where it actually gets, you get most gratification from, is when other people are moved, have their lives changed, or are influenced by work that you've done.
Well, again, there's a line in the film that I'm going to kind of close out the interview for now, and I think it might have been Jackson Browne who said it. The atmosphere at a concert with Carlos is it makes you feel like you're in a temple. And I mean, I've felt that before, and I visited lots of churches, lots of temples over the years with my travels in Southeast Asia and so on. And I can say your film does the same thing, or certainly did the same thing for me. So again, thank you for such a brilliant experience and a beautiful film, and for your time today, Ron. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us today on Face to Face.
Thank you so much. Pleasure talking with you, and be happy to come back. Happy to come back.
We'll have to set up a part 2 in the near future.